Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dev Relish. It feels like it's been a long time, Aaron, since we did an episode of Dev Relish. I feel
I
like
just think that February has been one of those months that's actually like January 2024. I don't think our calendars are working right. I think they're going
yeah.
slower this year.
You
Someone
think
go fix
maybe?
that.
Yeah, I think it's the leap year. It's made
It
everything
screwed everything
longer.
off. We're off.
So, okay, so we've got a great guest for you today, but I'm gonna start with a little bit of intro. So, for those of you who are new to the show, if you're joining us for the first time, hey, Brian, good to see you here. So this is a show obviously about developer relations, but there's all those jobs in developer relations that don't have a DevRel title, so that's why they're DevRel-ish. So we kind of try and cover everything about developer relations from the the community management to all these other things that kind of fall under that umbrella. So with that being said, uh, I am Brian Rinaldi. I'm a developer experience engineer at Launch Darkly, and my co-host is you can go ahead and
Yeah,
introduce
also
yourself.
a developer experience engineer at Launch Darkly.
Yes, we're twinsies.
Twinsies. I'm Erin McHale Staples, also developer experience engineer at Launch Darkly and comedian. I'm the funniest developer experience engineer at Launch Darkly. That is going to be my claim to fame.
Yeah, okay, we'll see. So, all right. So before we get started, I also want to thank our sponsor, Data Protocol. So, Data Protocol is a really awesome tool for DevRel folks. If it's basically like imagine like an interactive Netflix where you can share all kinds of educational material via video with your user base, and they can even interact via console and things like that. It's all like very cool, and you can create a whole level of material that you deliver to your community. So Data Protocol is really, really cool. You should check it out, dataprotocol.com. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and invite Colin Loretz on the stage. Hello, Colin.
Hello, how's it going, everybody?
Good, good. So go ahead and like just introduce yourself to everybody for folks who don't already know you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm currently a developer advocate at Discord, but kind of my tour of duty the last decade or so has been startups, freelance, agency life, and then I also run a co-working space. So I started a co-working space back in 2009, a little bit before the whole WeWork shenanigans that all started back then.
Hmm, hmm. So, okay. So both you and Aaron at some point worked at Orbit. I'm noticing there's a lot of, so also both you and Aaron, I'm going to point this out just because I think it's funny. You both like the word shenanigans. So, okay. It's not a word I just noticed it because it's like, it's not a word I use very often, but Aaron likes to use it a lot. And
It's a
yeah,
good
yeah.
verb. It's a good
It's,
thing to describe things. We've got an out of orbit party here because Brian as well was on the crew as well.
Yes.
Brian,
Yep.
Colin, and I all actually worked pretty closely together.
Okay. Does Brian say shenanigans a lot? Brian?
Yeah, he did.
I think that was an Aaronism that we picked up for sure.
I've worn off.
So good to get the crew back, a little reunion on Dev Relish. But yeah, thanks for having me. I think, you know, most related is just like at Orbit, we worked a lot with DevRel. And so it's good to see Aaron, Brian, and others landing at
Nice.
different companies.
And so was Orbit your first foray into kind of like this dev relish kind of type of role? Or I mean, what was your role at Orbit, and like what kind of led you into DevRel in general?
Yeah, so my role at Orbit was more software engineer, a little bit of kind of like pseudo PM, working with companies to figure out like what we should build. In terms of like, I think we can all, like you said in the intro, DevRel title has so many different facets to it. So building software for DevRel is challenging when there's not necessarily like one job to be done. There's a whole bunch of jobs, and so that was a little bit of my foray into like seeing what developer relations looks like as a job. Before that, I've done a lot of like teaching boot camps, working with the J School, journalism students, helping them to pick up tools, data science, things like that. So I've always kind of been in this like teacher role of taking things that are, the big scary tech things and translating them into things that people can pick up and use even outside of tech. Really enabling, again, journalists and others like that to be able to take those tools and make better stories, share their story, or even make a switch and jump into tech, or take their tech skills and bring it into other fields.
So Brian, if you heard that correctly, that basically means Colin gave me my dev skills. So if I break anything, it's actually Colin's fault.
All right, Colin, then you and I have a lot of talking to do.
But all being
All right.
said, I think like one of the things that's exciting is like you've been in the community space for a while, like whether it's, I think not explicitly, but you're one of those great examples of someone who's organized meetups or hackathons, or like you've done Code for Reno or Reinvent or Ignite, the collective, obviously. But how do you think those skills transition? And has it always been a natural skill set or something that you're like had to actually work at?
Yeah, so that actually came up when I applied to Discord, because my resume looks very atypical. Like even when I applied for software engineering jobs, it's like most software engineers don't also have a co-working space, don't also necessarily run a bunch of meetups and hackathons and things like that. And so some of that has been a thing I have to think about too, in terms of like, do I still, want to do those every single month, especially with meetups and things like that. In terms of like, just because we've always done them doesn't mean we always have to kind of carry those forward and do them. But that varied resume, in many cases, a lot of people will look at my resume and say, you need to take some of these things off. But almost every single one of them came into kind of play in my interviews with Discord, even with Orbit to some extent, where you really do want someone who, isn't like kind of cosplaying as a developer, in terms of being able to have been either a developer before or have picked up the skills. And I know that's another conversation that a lot of people have, is whether or not you need to be a developer to be developer relations, or to be in the role. But yeah, it really helped me to kind of clarify, like, yes, I understand, how community works, but more importantly, like community in business, because even in the co-working space, it's an interesting balance. Like we are a for-profit business, but it's also a community. And most co-working spaces will say that, but then they don't always, practice what they preach. They'll take every single member that walks in the front door, and they're not paying attention to, the health of the community, making sure that people feel like they belong to it. And, a lot of co-working spaces will, when things get hard, the community disappears, and they're not there to kind of stand behind the space, the community, all that kind of stuff. So like our community takes care of the space and the other members as much as we tried to.
So just so I understand correctly, so you still have the co-working space, or you're
Correct.
no longer? So you have so you're developer advocate at Discord. You run a co-working space. Are you still running the meetups and stuff?
So the developer meetup, that one's a funny one, because in Reno, we've had like the Reno RB Ruby group, we've had Linux user groups, we've had like every flavor of technology. There was a group, and most of the time, the person who was running it will either get burnt out or move away. And so we eventually created like one meetup called Dev Reno that kind of just absorbed all the little meetups as they kind of went to the side. And I just stepped down from running that back in January. So kind of taking a leap of faith that the community would continue to run it, because we've been running it kind of on and off, in and outside the co-working space for 10 years. And it was just like, I enjoy that it exists, but it's also an opportunity for someone else to kind of take that banner and learn a little bit from it too, learn some of the things that I learned along the way running that. So I did get to finally take something off my plate, which is something I'm encouraging more people to do. Like, just look at what you're up to, and when you take on new things, make sure you have space to take that on fully.
I hear you. I hear you. Funny, and like we have a similar thing here in Orlando. So I run a thing called the Orlando Devs, which is actually a 501c3 that like we under Orlando Devs, which is kind of like a meetup and a Slack and stuff. But under that, we have all the subgroups like Orlando JavaScript, Orlando PHP, Orlando DevOps, and a bunch of others are all kind of subgroups under Orlando Devs. So I know the feeling. It's a
Yeah.
lot of work. We have part of the reason of setting up an organization like that was because like people would get burnt out, and so things would just die. Um, and then one of the struggles has always been like that in theory, the board and the executive committee is supposed to keep that alive. But there's been various times where it ebbs and flows, and honestly, like I've even had to go and be like, okay, the whole point of this was that I was not going to be alone, and I seem to be alone. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. And it should
So,
be for fun too. Like, some of it is professional. A lot of people meet their, local professional contacts through that, but you start
yeah,
to lose the whole reason why you started it when you don't spread that out. And I've seen that with maker spaces and co-working spaces that try to go the nonprofit route, meetups, hackathons, all those kinds of things. And it is a lot of work. So anyone who does event work out there, like kudos. It's an interesting skill set because when you look from the outside, it looks really easy, but there's just like 1,000 tiny little things that have to get done to make events work.
And I want
yeah,
to go back to something you mentioned very early on when you're talking about the collective. And this is something, it was actually a reason I really enjoyed the collective. I used to be the collective member. But it was, you curate the members a little bit. Like you don't just accept absolutely everybody that walks in the door. Like I can go in and reserve a WeWork in New York 5 minutes from my house in however long it takes me to open their app. But like you actually have to do like a trial period with the collective. And what was the intention of doing that? And do you think it's led to success?
Yeah. So yeah, the collective is the co-working space, just for anyone listening. And yeah, it's interesting because like, on one hand with WeWork, the spaces are beautiful. But like how many people do you have a good relationship with when you go in and work? I don't think that we could do what we do at the scale of WeWork, but some would argue even WeWork can't do what they're doing at their scale. And we, we don't necessarily, we're not trying to gatekeep and say people can't come in, but it's kind of that niching down a little bit where if you try to create a community for everyone, it's not necessarily a community for any specific group. And so we want to be inclusive. We want to make sure the people who are the right fit are able to find a space. We've had some people who kind of come in and kind of do the LinkedIn thing where they try to farm all of our email addresses and sell to the members. Those people are the kinds of people we're talking about kicking out. So like we're always going to let people give it a fair shake, because some of it's us, like dating. We're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing us. They're trying out our space, but we also need to make sure that the space works, for all the members who are also in the communities, so that you don't have the people peeing in the pool as as it goes. So it's definitely a balance, because again, it is a business. We need as many members as makes sense to keep revenue going, and thankfully we do have a community manager to run it. So I am not running it like day to day, all the various things anymore. I'm making sure that the community manager has what they need, so that the members have what they need as well. And yeah, and it means that I also have a really good place to work as well.
yeah, that's cool. So, I mean, I think that a lot of what you said is kind of relevant to getting into DevRel stuff, because I mean, we, I think, kind of just thinking about the purpose of your community and about kind of creating it with intent is something that I think a lot of companies don't. I always feel like from a DevRel perspective, we're often charged with creating communities, right? But it's more from a company perspective, like we need a community so we can get this and that out of them. And there's not as much intention about what is the kind of community we're trying to build. How do we foster like those connections, and then ultimately, hopefully, that pays dividends. But yeah, it's a I think relevant to that.
Yeah. As Brian says, capitalism ruins everything. Um, but I think also it's just like being honest about like, hey, at the end of the day, it is like you got to just make money and pay bills. Like I would really like to pay my rent and feel good bucks, but some days I'm low on feel good bucks too. Okay. Like, let's be honest. I think one thing, and this is a great tangent and something I know that, you, Brian, and I have actually talked about a lot, is the difference.
Other Brian.
Yeah. Brian Robinson has talked about the difference between advocacy, experience, and relations. And I think this is something I've been actually talking a lot with Amara Graham about this, about like, what does developer experience mean in comparison to advocacy, and how does the role change, and do we really need to worry about defining it so much?
Yeah, I thought that this would be a fun one to talk about because there's developer relations, developer advocacy, developer support, DX. There's probably a few other ones we forgot, developer evangelism. And I kind of think of relations as like the umbrella, developer relations. And underneath that, you have all of those things that Brian mentioned at the top of the show, the things that may not get a specific job title that sometimes rolls down to DevRel in terms of like, oh, it touches some external developer surface, so that means it's DevRel, and then tends to be that anything that could touch that surface means it's now your job. And I've been talking to a lot of developer advocates, and even when we talk, Aaron, like my role is very different than a lot of developer evangelists and advocates, and so I've been trying to like navigate like where and why is it different, and maybe even how do we want to show up in terms of DevRel for Discord, because a lot of our work, I would say, is more internal advocacy. We do work with the community externally a lot, and they're very vocal. We do things like PRs to our docs in the public on GitHub. But then you have more evangelism, which I see as a little bit more external. And again, everyone can define these differently, but this is just kind of how I frame it. And so we don't do as much of like submitting lots of CFPs to talks and going out and doing lots of events and things like that. It's a lot more thinking through, what do we offer developers today? What doesn't work well for the developers today? Working with the product teams and kind of like interviewing our own engineers about what they're working on, figuring out what docs need to be updated, what docs need to change, what gaps do we offer, things like that. So it's a lot more developer relations in that we are going to be eventually delivering things to developers, but we're not necessarily doing kind of more like the SendGrid, Twilio, like how fast can you send an email or make a text message type demos and stuff like that.
I mean, maybe this is a spicy take. We're here for a spicy take, Brian, like spicy take, but I think is the DevRel of Twilio and SendGrid kind of a thing of yesteryear, because I think of like what Brian and my week has looked like, and mine has been a lot of like partnership or ecosystem type projects, and video content. Like it's been a lot of behind the scenes internal enabling content for the two of us. My role at my last company was very different, even from the role I played at Orbit, which was, yes, there was a very significant external facing portion, but my primary role was an open source maintainer. Like it was triaging a repo for most of the day, which is very different.
Well, I think that's a good point. I actually think I probably somewhat agree with you that the role is changing quite a bit. And I definitely feel like the evangelism part, like when I started many years ago, when we were both children. No, just kidding. um, it was evangelism was kind of the primary thing. It was but I always thought of evangelism as more of like an outward facing. This is just like it's like the megaphone. I'm going out there and I'm touting the product and then how great the product is and trying to get awareness for the product, but I'm not there for conversation. So as an example, when I was at Adobe, and I'm not trying to diss anybody on that team, it was great, like really talented team, but these were folks who tended to show up in an event like half an hour before their talk, and then they'd go give their big talk and do their whole thing, and then they'd finish the talk, chat with a few people, and then pack it up and go. And if you went to any of the like networking type things, they were not there. If you went to like any of the other aspects of the event, they were just absent. and Ray's a DevRel at Adobe right now. So, but also Ray was around back then, so he remembers it was a different time. So that to me was like that's the essence of like the evangelist. It's like I'm really here just to kind of be the megaphone. And the advocacy to me was where we started bringing in this like two-way communication, where it's like I'm here, I'm talking about like I'm going to be the honest broker about the product, right? And I'm going to talk about the benefits, but I'm also going to be like realistic about where it fits and things like that. I'm not going to be like just talking how great it is all the time. And then I'm also here to like bring that feedback back from the community back into the company, to help build the product and make it better. And I think that to me was the form that's kind of gained prominence for a while. I don't know if it's edging back towards like an outward facing thing or
I mean,
something different, but it does feel like it's changing.
I bet there's one thing we all have in common, which is anytime, if you're like the three of us are all fairly public on the internet, like you can track us down. Anytime that you have a developer friend or a builder friend that has a problem with your products and they go, my one friend in DevRel obviously is going to fix it tomorrow, you become like the week one I joined LaunchDarkly, someone was like, here's this pull request that I worked on 2 years ago. And I was like, I'll be right on that. Week one. But I feel like I'm guilty of doing the same thing. I'm like, Colin, why isn't this Discord thing working? Fix it. Go up right to the top. Fix it tomorrow.
We do have that
Let's
invisible
make the
network.
rest of the show about issues with Discord. Should we?
Yeah, I think actually, Colin, we have a few things that we need to work on right now.
We can share some of the tips and tricks to make it a little bit easier. But
Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to
what are you
interrupt.
excited for? And I love this, like what Andy chimed in. Origins of advocacy is a legal concept to add a voice, and I think that's a huge point of what all of the fields do. Like, I think definitely like being more on the internal side and like back, especially, which is like that was a huge actually adjustment for me to get aware of, is LaunchDarkly is an open source. So coming from an open source company where that was a huge part of my time was like, I'm not triaging tickets anymore or pull requests or opening issues or cleaning up issues or explaining to someone why I can't just build dark mode in a pull request and that's not the highest priority of my day.
Totally. Well, what I like about the to add a voice kind of definition is that like we say we have an engineer on a team that doesn't know how our third-party developers build bots, on our platform. They might make a change that fixes the ticket that they have, but they may not realize that it may be a breaking change to the API that affects developer workflows. And so it is our job to be that voice of how we considered what this is going to do if you ship this. And sometimes they get shipped, and sometimes we have to walk those back. We might have to work with them to come up with like a timeline for if we have to ship this, let's come up with a timeline. Let's do the developer communications around it. Let's make sure people know that it's coming. And so that we can be in those rooms where the third-party developers aren't going to be in those meetings. They're not going to be seeing those internal PRs. So that's a lot of that, like the interviewing skills. And to be honest, like I really got to flex a lot more like product management skills towards the end of my time at Orbit. And like a lot of those are, I think, if you're like trying to figure out where you might want to double down as a developer advocate, is learning more product management things is super helpful, because it's, kind of distilling that feedback, to Brian's point, taking it back to the team where it's like this was our goal for this feature, but it doesn't quite hit the way that we, talk about it, or in the real world, right? We had a plan, we got it out in the real world, and it didn't work out that way. And so maybe it just needs a slight adjustment, or we might need to rethink the whole thing. And so taking that, kind of jobs to be done, the Eric Rees and Steve Blank stuff, like a lot of that stuff is extremely relevant to developer advocacy in terms of distilling feedback and doing customer interviews and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I still tell people the most valuable thing I did that prepared me for the role I'm in now was user research and my product classes in grad school. Like between that and I worked as a user researcher in grad school, like that was single-handedly probably the best and most relevant work experience I had until I was actually in the role.
Yeah. I would add to like that though, and this gets to like a common, like common debate you'll see come up in some of the DevRel kind of slacks and things like that is I feel like that advocacy type of work functions better when the team is in product or at least closely connected to product, because then you do have those connections where you have those channels open internally where you can go straight to the product team. I've served on both like teams that report into product, and I've served on teams that report into marketing, as well as like ones that kind of take this middle ground approach where they report it into like office of the CTO, which some is like adjacent to product. So it was close to enough that you could kind of build those channels of communication. But I find it's more difficult when you're in marketing because you don't have easy direct channels into the product.
Mhm.
I don't know.
I
Definitely.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
it also helps to have like a product or an engineering team that wants DevRel. I think I've been very fortunate. The places that I've worked, they've wanted DevRel. Like, I mean, my morning started off with working with the product team today. And so that it's really great when it's actually like a wanted thing. And a team is like trained on like how to work with a DevRel team, right? Or a dev experience team. It's like we're meeting with this person to try out a new feature, to see something. Like this morning, I was doing user testing, and kind of helping folks structure that. But it's like that marriage of understanding like how to leverage those strengths is really important, which I think people forget about sometimes. Like
Yeah.
they don't realize they have a resource.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
Andy and Pat definitely have great comments. It's definitely easier when you're under product or engineering. At Discord, like I'm embedded in a product team, and our interviews for Dev Advocates is very much an engineering interview. But we also have a dev marketing department, right? And so we work with dev marketing to do some of that stuff. But day to day, I'm still, might be doing documentation. I might be doing some more of those like internal advocacy type things. There's still going to be events. There's still going to be some of those more marketing type things. Thinking about how we actually show up in dev marketing so that it resonates with developers and isn't necessarily like just marketing speak or something like that is also big. So yeah, I think the big thing is the challenge here is that every company handles it differently and the culture is different, and yeah, even the title can be different.
Even like the work, because like I mean, we don't have docs. Brandon and we have a separate docs team that we will give
Yeah.
feedback to and work with, but like
Mhm.
I don't write docs. We write tutorials, which is a different
Right.
it's a different
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen roles like specifically that are DevRel. It's like, oh, you're gonna own the docs. Usually it's just smaller companies, but like and even past, I've been at a couple of startups before this where like their entire documentation from top to bottom was originally written by me, or at least rewritten by me. Um,
Yeah.
so
humble brag, okay? Humble brag.
Getting
yeah,
those
I mean,
getting those
but no, that
commits.
because I was just like that. You had to do that. Nobody else owned that. Like there
Yeah.
was not a. We were not big enough for a docs team, and I mean, a lot of companies don't actually have a like hired
Mhm.
writing staff for docs. They rely on other teams to create those for better or worse. So
Yeah,
Totally.
no, truly.
Yeah, and I would say like that's one where like there is a skill set to learn there if that's like part of your job description. If it's not, definitely talk to whoever's in charge of your job description. And if you're going to be doing the work, make the invisible work visible, so that you're not doing, because it's really easy for DevRel work to become invisible and just be taken for granted that it gets done. And it's like the DevRel team is holding all those things together without really, just explicitly having ownership of it. And it gets done. The docs get updated, and it's good to just make sure that stuff is visible. Especially in larger companies where you're probably going to be bound by like self reviews and peer reviews and things like that. So you don't necessarily want it to just be like, well, that gets taken care of invisibly over in that corner, and I guess we'll just let that keep happening. Meanwhile, your team is burning out, and
yeah,
everyone's kind of wondering like, well, is this what work's supposed to look like?
Yeah, that's an excellent point because I mean I think in the past I've tried to think of ways where because sometimes DevRel sits in this place where they get a lot of demands from different groups across the company, but they don't own a lot of the like you said, they don't own a lot of the tasks. Like, oh, we need somebody to do these events, but those events are owned by an events team or the marketing team, and you need people to do these webinars, but the webinars are owned by demand generation, and and so on and so forth. And one point in my career, I ran a content team, which was like a service org, where we serviced all these different groups, and the perception was a little bit different for a service org. It wasn't expected to like generate a lot of stuff on its own, like own a lot of tasks. We were by nature we were just getting the tasks that kind of came from different groups. um and I've thought of like, is it worth sometimes thinking of DevRel in that perspective? But then I also feel like it gives it a short shrift on other aspects that like should be owned by DevRel. But I do feel like, especially now, as like we're kind of hurting in DevRel. I mean, you see layoffs constantly, teams being cut, and companies being like, "Oh, I just don't know if we know the value of DevRel," and it's like, and a lot of those tasks, I think it's partly because a lot of those tasks were invisible. They were
Right.
just
Mhm.
done like a service org where it just everybody just called on DevRel to do this or that or whatever, but DevRel didn't get credit for it. It was like whatever team owned it got the credit.
Yeah, and I think there's one, like, I think this is a great point. I don't think we've talked about this on the podcast yet, like of like that doing, how do you make that work invisible? And I think so many people, including myself, like I had to kind of force myself out of this habit of like, oh, it comes across as bragging of what I'm doing. Like, look at all the stuff that I'm doing. And I think, for better or worse, DevRels do have the personality traits, and some folks tend to get into this field because they like to talk. And I think one of the things that we need to be very cognizant of is, how do you showcase the value you create without making noise? And I think that's a very hard balance to find, and something I feel like I'm constantly refining. Um, Even if it's just like, and that's actually been something moving to a larger organization, that it's like very different to think about, because holy Slack channels, y'all, like feel like when you're in a smaller organization, you're like 30 and I know everybody's name from the CTO to the CEO to the intern, and I can name all their names and throw them all in one Slack channel. And now I'm like, for the first time in my career, sitting in a Slack channel, I'm like, wow, this is 250 people to it. And what's the right ratio for signal versus noise?
Yeah, and I think you don't want to end up with the issue like from the Office Space, interview where it's like, so what would you say you do here? And that invisible work is it's important to make it visible. I think like there's a really good blog post that I can send a link to on like creating a brag sheet. And so you have this internal doc for yourself that you just kind of keep track of the things that you do, so that when you do have an interview with your manager or a self review, you're not trying to remember all the little things that you did, or stopping a breaking change from going out prematurely, things like that. Prior to going to Discord, I was kind of on this path of figuring out if I wanted to keep going up the engineering ladder and go on from senior engineer towards like a staff plus role, and kind of keep going up that ladder. And there's some really good books and resources around that, specifically, and it's starting to become a more talked about thing. And there's not a lot talking about this in DevRel. There are some newer books. There are some really great resources. You guys have interviewed some great guests on some of those as well. But they do talk a lot about the different archetypes of staff engineers. And so like the first book I would look at is Staff Engineer, from Will Larson. And even though it's meant for staff engineers, it's good to read to look at the different archetypes. And they talk about glue work. And glue work is that invisible work that I thought was important. Like when you're in startups, like there's a lot of glue work, there's a lot of stuff you just do because no one else is doing it. And when you get into bigger companies, I think that's where DevRel being glue, it doesn't show the value of DevRel. You need to be able to have these like tentpole things that you can brag a little bit about.
Mm.
So that's Staff Engineer by Will Larson. There's a few other really good books from Will, An Elegant Puzzle and things like that. And then the other one was Engineering Management for the Rest of Us from Sarah Drasner. So those are just two good books to kind of have either the vocabulary to talk about these things, but also just to think about like what your engineering managers are thinking about, so that you know where other people are thinking and what their perspective is. Especially when, if you're moving between companies, the culture and expectations are going to be extremely different than where you were before.
This is the one I haven't read the other ones, but I've read the engineering management for the rest of us, and that one and the design of everyday things is actually the book that I actually find myself rereading every year. And there's I think it's that book or one of the other books that Don Norman writes, but he has like writing the perfect status update. And it's probably one of the best things ever. Or even, this sounds so silly and I might get bullied by the other ex-orbiters because I think it had mixed feels at Orbit, but I still use it. And it's I don't know if you guys remember our internal communication. We had a very specific way of like, use this emoji for this, or bold a headline in a Slack thing. Don't write a paragraph, like write bullets. And that actually is super helpful. And someone commented on how I write Slack updates at Launch Darkly, like my first month. And I was like, thank you, Amanda, for teaching, like forcing this all on us. And we all hated it, but it works.
Yeah, it's hard
We
to
need
parse.
we need a Dev Relish book club for all
Yeah.
these books.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
Yeah.
Sign me up for the book club. I've got lots. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of these books, what's interesting, some of them can kind of, like these ones that I just mentioned aren't necessarily self-help books, but a lot of self-help genre books don't really like hit home until you need them. I know another one I recommend to a lot of people is called Quit. Especially if you find yourself carrying and picking up a lot of tasks and never putting them back down again. It's very, very easy to do. And so like, if the theme for what I've been trying to do is we spend so much time in front of these screens that we need to make sure that we have a balance. And our jobs do allow us to have a little bit of that balance, whether it's events or getting out in front of people, doing live streams, doing video demos of our own projects and stuff too. And so, making sure that we aren't absorbed by the very thing that we work in every day, and makes us human, makes us, more relatable to other people when we're working with them too. So yes, we do a lot of books in the co-working space. We do that a lot. So
Quit's one that's been on my list of like, because it just seemed relevant. I tend to take on a lot of tasks both in and out of work. I'm one of those people. As an example, the very site that we're broadcasting this to was a small little side project that has become like basically my weekends, and many evenings and stuff like that, and obviously now in the afternoon. And then the Orlando Devs thing, it's like, so I pick a lot of these things up, and it's just like at times it's it's just an overwhelming list
yeah,
of things. And I have a hard time putting them down because I'm like, well, if I put them down, then nobody else is going to pick them up, and then it's just dead. And is
Or
that
it's
what
a
I want?
scary thought.
It's
Yeah.
that, or it's like not going to go as well. Or the thing, like Quit was the book that smacked me in the face, and I think Colin recommended it to me in November, December of last year, and I was like, damn it. I like texted him 2 days later. I was like, damn it, like simultaneously like, thank you, but I hate you because this book is making me feel so attacked. Like,
And that's the tricky thing, right? If you don't resonate with the book, you probably don't need it right now. But when you find yourself overworked, carrying too many things, it's going to be like, yeah, someone should have pulled me out of this a while ago. And I sympathize with being kind of afraid to stop doing something, because how do you pick it back up again? Or it's not going to go as well. And a lot of our community for our meetup was like, no one will catch it if you don't let go of it. You keep catching it. You keep letting it fall a little bit, and then you catch it. So I'm sure there's I'm not a parent, but I'm sure there's a bunch of parenting analogies in here of, letting people touch the hot stove and things like that. So
Yeah.
if I'm always saving it, no one else is going to do it because they assume I'm going to do it. And so I've just had to step back. The meetup for next month hasn't been published yet. It's okay. It's almost March. Someone will eventually figure it out and they'll do it. So you have to be okay with it. Otherwise, it's just living rent free, forever in your brain.
Yeah,
No.
there's also a bit of like, I think with some of these things, as you pick up things, you start to identify yourself with them, right? So it's like, it's not just letting go a task. It's like, but that's been part of me for
Yeah,
like so long. Like, who am I if I'm not like, Brian the Orlando who runs Orlando Devs or whatever, I'm just using that as an example, but like you drop these things and it's like, okay, well, I'm not just letting go of a task. I'm letting go of something I kind of identified myself with.
totally. Yeah, with the co-working space, we've been now doing it for almost 15 years, and I think the same thing because it's like it has been something that I've done for like a third of my life, and it's very much an identity thing. And I've been trying to think about how can I celebrate that instead of like, you can mourn it, but you can also celebrate it. And so celebrating the idea of moving on from the developer group and letting someone else take it on. If one day I ever leave the co-working space, what does it look like for it to live on? Does that mean bringing in new people? Does that, mean in teaching them to how to run it so that it's run the way that you liked it? Because a lot of people, there's a reason why people probably ran it. Go to the events that you're talking about, Brian, and want to continue doing that. So
There's a really good so I attended and spoke at Strange Loop this last year, and they had a special session because it was the last year of Strange Loop, and they gave a keynote presentation, the founder of it and the organizer of it, and the organizing team gave a presentation. And it is probably one of the best talks I've ever seen at a conference. And it basically is one of those talks that's like, so what? Like, if this doesn't exist, so what? And what are we learning from? Like, what are the findings can we learn from a group that is meeting that is no longer meeting? And it was a really great perspective of like, if you have X hours in a day, what is the thing that you want to give your time for? And like what things, like how do you invest your time in what's important to you, but also the larger community? And maybe it's like you're doing it for someone else and not yourself. And sometimes you got to be selfish. But anywho, good talk.
yeah,
Go find the
this will be our therapy session later.
Yeah, that's for the therapy session later. This is actually group therapy. DevRelish is very like group therapy time, but there was a lot of like the focus around like the like letting things sunset. But he actually was like, there was a very intentional reason he did not be like, I'm going to pass the reins to someone else. He's like, no, this is ending for a reason. And it was actually really well done.
Nice. And yes, pickles do not expire.
Deep. We're in a very deep DevRelish time. Like sometimes
it did get deep.
Like, and I think also it's like very interesting because it's like the conversations that's what's been great about this is like sometimes we have a lot of self-taught people. Colin, I think you're the most experienced engineer on this that we've ever had on the show.
Also self-taught.
Yeah, also self-taught.
So. But I don't know about it. Most experienced. We'll see. The more Markdown I write, the less I'm certain that that's the case. I'm like, well, I'm writing words today, just blocking off some time just so I can write and just turn off everything and write.
Yeah, well, Markdown is a skill.
It is.
I write a lot of Markdown myself. So, yeah, I mean, most of the site is built on Markdown. So there you go.
Brian's the only person I've met that does not use Google Docs for a blog post.
What? Who uses Google Docs for blog posts?
Wait, what?
Because I use Markdown. I put Markdown in GitHub, and if you want to make some changes, you put like a PR, and it's super easy. Like I send it to people. I'm like, hey, the only people it doesn't really work for is when I have to send it to like the marketing team, or whatever, whoever's going to produce.
I mean, I guess
I
start in Obsidian, which is Markdown.
Yeah.
I like Obsidian.
Yeah, the only pain about Obsidian, I love Obsidian, and I use it a lot, but like the pain about Obsidian for blog posts for me is that when I copy it out, it's just since like I put it if I put it into I use what's my editor? I use Typora. I love Typora's editing interface for it, and then I just check that into GitHub, and then I could copy paste a preview of GitHub straight into a Google Doc without having to like do anything to it because it has the preview of the Markdown. Just paste that into a Google Doc for when it's time to like send it off to marketing for production.
The Google Doc Markdown has gotten pretty. It can copy over from at least everything but images. Images it doesn't do great.
I'm taking
Yeah.
notes on the tools.
Yeah.
You can. So when I paste it from GitHub, the images just flat out just work when I paste it over. So I don't have to do that. But if I paste it from Obsidian pastes as Markdown. It doesn't paste as rich text.
You got to go to the stupid little. There's like a stupid setting in Google Docs that you have to like find, and it's a toggle. Once you find it, it works. But you have to find the stupid setting.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check out Joplin. That's a new
I know
one.
Joplin. I haven't heard of that one. I completely
Me
walked
neither.
away from Notion.
Yeah, I don't like
because
Notion. I never liked Notion.
I got into it. It was working for a while, and then I moved everything from Notion into Obsidian because I was finding like the search on Notion is so bad that I wasn't actually like. I don't remember, like there's some blog out there that someone posted like your notes are only as good as the notes that you actually reference. So it's like, why are you taking notes if you don't actually reference them? Like
some second brain stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and so moving everything to Obsidian, where I actually search it and reference it and link it and see like the different projects that I've worked with it, or I can link out to like talking about BragDoc, like mine's in a personal Obsidian that like I can pull out and like link and be like, wow, you were learning this skill. Like right now it's like, hey, you're learning Next.js. Here's when you were yelling at React 3 months ago. Look how far you've come in 3 months.
You know what else sucks for searchability? Aaron, Google Docs.
No, not if you have a weirdo typing like organization.
Sorry, Google.
It does. I can never find my docs in Google Docs. I'm like, is it in my recents? Is it in my unless I make a ton of folders, it's just impossible to find anything. So anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're on a lot of tendency today.
Yeah. So on that note, I know things got pretty deep here. But we're running low on time and we need to leave time. So I told you, Colin, earlier that we always have at the end of Dev Relish, just because it fits, we have a pickle fact. Today's not a pickle fact. Today's more of a fermentation fact. So we may have to rebrand the pickle fact to fermentation fact. And here I was gonna go get like a big animation that
this is what you're getting for now.
I didn't do this yet.
Sparkle fingers. Fun fermentation facts. Yay.
All right, Aaron, fermentation fact.
Fashion Week in 2020 is one of their first appearances. There is a kombucha couture company that makes living kombucha fashion. It's not really my jam fashion-wise, but like it's cool. They've done, they even go back to, they were doing work in San Francisco and Sacramento as early as 2013. And it is all based off of the same SCOBY work and has been featured all around the globe. And they also
How do you make kombucha fashion? I mean,
you take
it's sustainable.
Yeah, you take the SCOBY. So if you ever make kombucha, it's like a snot bacteria thing. I mean, I think that's the best way of describing it. Like I've made kombucha before.
You just ruined kombucha for me. And by the way, I love kombucha. That's it. I can't drinking snot. I don't know.
It's like
you'll have to Google it.
The thing that's in the top of the kombucha when you make it is a SCOBY, and that's where the bacteria is, which actually stands for symbiotic colony of yeast and bacteria. That's what a SCOBY is.
I think kimchi couture is the next trend.
Yeah, kimchi couture is next. NeoMonk, you're starting that kimchi couture. Let me know when it's available.
Some spicy kimchi.
Yeah, spicy. But yeah.
All right, I'm gonna have to Google how kombucha is made. I've never really thought about it before, but I don't know. When you describe it as snot, I'm like,
It's just the thing, like it's filtered out. You filter out the big chunk, and the rest of it. That's what makes the bacteria. Like that's why you get. It's like the same as yogurt.
Yeah,
I will shut up before I ruin yogurt for everybody.
Some of these things, don't ruin yogurt for me, please. Come on, some of these things, it's like what is it? You don't want to know how the
sausage
sausage is made exactly.
So my grandparents grew up on a farm where they actually did make sausage, so I'm probably ruined for life. Like,
Yeah.
There's no
I'm
subject.
just screwed.
Yeah.
Between that and
Well,
the
this is
mold,
why you can
Yeah.
you do your fermentation stuff, and it's like, yeah.
I will report back. I have 1 more week and then I have hot sauce. So I will report back. Currently it's sitting in a dark cabinet that I've moved everything out of. So we have like a stack of pots and pans on the countertop because I've cleared out a cabinet for New York.
Are you bringing some to our company all hands?
Oh, I could. Yeah, I could bring hot
I
sauce
need
to our all
some.
hands.
Except you have to check the bag, maybe, unless it's in
know.
the little things.
I'll sneak it in the
All
little
right.
tiny
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. So this was actually like, I mean, I'm not surprised, but it was a ton of fun. This was a good conversation. Got very deep. I learned a lot. I have a lot of books to read, apparently. So yeah, thank you so much, Colin, for coming on the show and chatting with us.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day and all that good stuff. And thanks for tuning in, folks. Next month, we can announce it, right? Yeah, we could announce their job.
Sure.
We have Jay Miller, newly of Ivan, next month.
Yes, and
Nice.
that reminds me. Speaking of weekend jobs, that was supposed to be my weekend job to post that this past weekend, and I just took time off. So it'll be up. It'll be up very, very soon. So look for
that's your foreshadowing. You heard it here first. We can do the cool
That's this
TV announcer.
weekend.
You heard it here first. It's not public on the internet, except now it is because I said it. But
all right, folks. Well, we will see you then next month. I will get that posted ASAP, and you can look for it on cfa.dev. Plus, we have lots of other shows coming up, so join those as well. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
bye, all.